a comparative analysis of women in the Noor and Deoband movements. The point of focus is understanding how the thoughts and responses to Islamic tradition by the Noor and Deoband movements shape the understanding of women-related topics according to the two movements. The Deoband and Noor movements are two Islamic revivalist movements. They are transnational groups which have a great influence on their followers across the globe, including in Australia. It is imperative to note that Islamic movements have differences and nuances in their understanding of Islamic scripture based on several factors which directly impacts their understanding of Islamic topics. In other words, there are different reasons due to which the two movements have a different understanding of Islamic topics, which impact the followers' understanding and Islamic practice. The factors that contribute in the differences in the movement's understanding include the nuances in the interpretation of scripture, the historical context of the movement's formation, as well as the cultural influence in the origin of the movements. In other words, there are several factors that impact an Islamic movement's theoretical understanding of different topics. This then directly impacts the practice of the followers. In order to understand the reasons behind the differences that were just mentioned, it should be noted that differences primarily between Muslims can be classified in three ways. These include number one, the differences in Aqidah, or the tenets or beliefs, or the denomination of Islam followed, more specifically, the denomination of Sunni and Shia. Secondly, within the Sunni denomination, there are differences in approach to the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence. Some choose to follow a particular school of jurisprudence while others do not associate with any of the schools. Thirdly, some have a Sufi influence while others do not. Deoband is associated with particular Sufi groups, whereas the Noor movement's writings have Sufi influence. It is interesting to note that the Deoband and Noor movements both follow the Sunni denomination of Islam. Furthermore, they both believe the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence are correct and that individuals or their followers should adhere to one school to be able to practice the rulings easily. Also, both the movements have a Sufi influence. In summary, both the Noor and Deoband movements have the same Aqidah, a highly similar approach to Islamic jurisprudence, as well as Sufi influence. Despite this, however, there are differences between the two movements in their interpretation of scripture, which then leads to the differences in understanding of Islamic topics and rulings. The differences in the philosophy, as well as the context of the start of the movements, play a role in understanding the differences in their views. These differences are also found in their understanding of women-related topics. There are several differences. One is the approach to veiling. The Deoband movement is considered stricter in its approach to rulings with regard to women, including the ones that are listed here. The general ruling with regard to the veil is that the face covering, according to the Deoband movement, is considered necessary for women. Women are also discouraged from working where there might be interaction with the opposite gender. In comparison, however, the Noor movement is labeled as more lenient. The hijab or the head covering is considered necessary, but the face covering is not. Furthermore, open mixing in terms of personal relationships with the opposite gender are discouraged, but working alongside them professionally is allowed. These are just a few examples amongst the many differences in the approach to women-related topics that are found in the movements. These differences can stem from the approach of the Deoband and Noor movement towards women, or their philosophy in the context of social and spiritual life. The purpose of this study, therefore, is understanding the perception of women by the two movements, as well as the reasons that lead to these differences. This study is an important contribution to academia for several reasons. The Deoband and Noor movements are transnational, and they have developed communities with global presence. Both the movements have followers and sympathizers in Australia. Australian Muslims have worked on understanding and merging the differing Islamic scholarly views. However, many times, competing views cause confusion and tension for the Muslim community. Therefore, contribution to understanding the differing views on the topics is essential in the current community. This study will fill the gap in the literature available on the views regarding women's participation in society of the Noor and Deoband movements. We will further evaluate the impact of the teachings on the social and religious activities of Australian women. No significant study has captured the relationship between Islamic revivalist movements and their impact on Muslim women in the Australian culture. The following main question and sub-questions will be used for the preparation of the research work. The main question is, what is the philosophy of the Deoband and Noor movement towards women in the context of social and spiritual life in Australia? The sub-questions include, what are the Noor and Deoband movements' views regarding women? Secondly, what are the similarity and differences in these views? And lastly, are there differences in Islamic practice amongst Muslim women in Australia? This literature review deals with the Deoband and Noor movement's views with regards to women. To understand the Deoband movement's views on women, a brief background is on the formation will be firstly mentioned, along with the views of renowned scholars from the Deoband movement regarding women. Similarly, for the Noor movement, the formation of the movement will be explained, and furthermore, the works of the movement's founder, Sayyid Nursi, will be consulted. In terms of the literature available regarding the formation of the Deobandi movement, many books and articles have been published by Muslims as well as non-Muslim scholars. Scholars affiliated with Deoband have published books about its philosophy, history, and development, as well as rulings given regarding different topics. Some of these have been published on their online library. Scholars associated with the Deoband movement have mentioned that 1857 and beyond, the British had control over India and Islamic knowledge was diminishing. At the same time, Christian missionary work in India was rising dramatically. Within this context, some Islamic scholars felt the need to preserve the Islamic faith and spread Islamic teachings. It was felt that independent Islamic educational institutions that were separate from the government should be founded for this purpose. It is within this context that the Darul Uloom Deoband, the educational institution that is associated with the Deoband movement, came into being. It should also be noted that the Deoband movement does not have a single founder. It was founded in a combined attempt by multiple scholars, including Rashid Ahmed Gangohi and Muhammad Qasim Nanotwi. Their literature has also been included, and it suggests that the movement was aimed at preserving the Islamic faith to safeguarding Muslims from the British influence. The Deoband movement has therefore primarily been an educational movement that was started with the intention of reviving Islamic teachings. The Deoband movement adopted the Dars-e-Nizami syllabus, in which scholars place great emphasis on the Qur'an and Hadith, which is referred to as the traditional sciences, as opposed to logic and jurisprudence, known as the rational sciences. This is important in understanding that the Deoband movement was created with the purpose of serving as a social entity instead of a political institution with the followers' active role in government. This study will examine the effect of the historical context with this literature of the formation of the movement on the ideas or philosophy of the Deoband movement, particularly specifically to women. The Noor movement originated from the teachings and writings of Sayyid Nursi, most particularly his renowned commentary on the Qur'an called the Risale-e-Noor. For this study, it is important to understand how the Noor movement developed into a global movement that we have now. Literature by renowned authors of the Noor movement, including Abu Rabi and Martin, suggest that Nursi began teaching the Risale Noor to his students with the purpose of reigniting belief in God amidst the then secular society of Turkey. His message began to attract more and more students since the Risale Noor uniquely merged scientific teachings of the 20th century with classical Islamic teachings. This helped the Muslims understand how to live and apply religious teachings in their modern secular age. Nursi intended to revive the faith in Muslims and clear their doubts regarding religion. It has been suggested by these authors that he channeled this effort in the form of writing the Risale Nur. Furthermore, they write that as students of the Risale Nur kept increasing, an identity of a religious movement came into existence. However, the literature suggests that Nursi did not intend to start a religious movement. Though the Noor movement is based on his teachings, he has emphasized that the movement centers on the teachings of the Risale Noor rather than a person. As mentioned earlier, he intended to revive the faith in the Muslims without the involvement of politics and without the intention of creating an Islamic state. This is similar to the formation of the Deoband movement that was mentioned before. In this section of the literature review, the historical context of the formation of the Noor movement will be studied and examined in relation to its impact on the views of the movement. The Deoband movement's approach to women's issues is traditionalist. Two types of literature are available regarding women. The first is by the movement's own affiliates, and the second by outside academics. In this section, both will be examined briefly. The Deoband movement has a website, Darul Ifta, where it posts Islamic legal rulings regarding different issues, which represent its official stances regarding topics, including in terms of women. However, the website focuses only on legal rulings. Due to this, there is no mention of the spiritual dimension or understanding women's purpose or role in life. Similarly, the social dimension is also not mentioned. Furthermore, research pertaining to analysis of the Deoband's philosophy regarding women, as well as compilation of the different rulings, has not specifically been done. However, in order to understand the Deoband perspective regarding women, books that are taught as part of its syllabus will be consulted. These include books of legal jurisprudence such as Behishti Zever. Also, Western scholars, including Barbara Metcalfe, have written extensively on the Deoband movement, and those teachings are used for this study. An important idea that emerges in the Deobandi literature is the concept of the ideal woman according to the movement and the role of woman in the household as a wife and mother. Studies have been conducted in Deobandi women madrasas in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. They suggest that women adhere to strict rules with regards to interacting with the opposite gender as well as covering. These studies will be used in this literature review. However, no comprehensive study in the Australian context of the Deoband movement has been conducted. Said Nursi, the founder of the Noor movement, has authored many books and has several works attributed to him. His works are used as the primary sources for the literature review. He does not dwell much on Islamic jurisprudence. His area of focus is faith. Since the guidelines regarding faith are applicable to both genders, not much differentiation is done by writing extensively for women or men separately. However, he makes specific references to women in 7 of his works: A Guide for Women, A Conversation with Women, My Believing Sisters of the Hereafter, A Question and Introduction, as well as mentions in the 25th word in the words and the flashes. These will be used as the primary sources in the research. In the treatise, A Guide for Women, as well as his other works, he primarily writes about the nature and qualities of women, marriage, the need for modesty, and a few women issues, including inheritance, that arose in his context. Apart from mentioning the nature of women and importance of marriage, Nursi talks specifically about three issues: the importance of veiling, inheritance, and polygamy. However, as mentioned earlier, not a lot of his works is written specifically for or about women, since most of his teachings are applicable to both genders. He focuses primarily on reviving faith in Muslims and reaffirming their Muslim identity during a deeply secularized era. The Noor movement has considerably less literature available regarding rulings in terms of women. Academic research is available regarding the history and identity of the Noor movement by esteemed authors such as Marden, as mentioned earlier. Those will be used as the secondary resources for this study. Books by Said Nursi give insight into the movement's philosophy and goals. However, to the researcher's knowledge, no comprehensible study has been done regarding the views of women from the perspective of the Noor movement. Research regarding the Australian women, followers of the Noor and Deoband movement, has not been done. For this study, data will be collected from existing websites regarding organizations associated with the two movements in Australia to see the effects of the views within the Australian context. This research will be based on theoretical and qualitative research methodologies. It will include a comprehensive literature review regarding women related to both movements. The research will encompass a qualitative analysis of different scholars from the Deoband and Noor movements in this field, works of the founders of the Deoband movement, as well as curriculum textbooks will be used as primary sources. For the Noor movement, the works of Sayyid Nursi, the founder of the movement, will be used as the primary sources. Textual analysis will then be adopted to extract the overall views regarding women of the movements. The views regarding women will then be compared between the movements through different variables, taking Australia as a case study. The comparative analysis theoretical framework will be used. This qualitative study will use comparative analysis as the selected works will be examined and categorized according to the corresponding issue. In summary, the views regarding women of the two movements will be extracted through qualitative analysis, and secondly, the views will then be compared through the comparative analysis theoretical framework. The first chapter of the study will cover the introduction, literature review, and methodology. The second chapter will include the histories of the Deoband and Noor movements, as well as their views regarding women. The third chapter will encompass how the theories of the Deoband and Noor movements regarding women have impacted their female followers with regard to their roles in education, family, community service, and religious service in Australia. Lastly, this is a timeline of my proposed research. In 2021, I aim to complete chapters 1, 2, and 3. In 2022, I'll make revisions based on the feedback from supervisors. The introduction and conclusion will also be added. I'll then begin with the first complete draft of the study. Editing will be done according to feedback till the final copy can be submitted. Thank you.
Momina, thank you so much for this great presentation. It is very interesting research topic. Now, after this presentation, we will listen to reviews. Professor Ismail Albayrak, and then after that, Dr. Süleyman Setkaya. Please, if you provide your general feedback during this colloquium, because at the end of this colloquium, we will have a private review panel, then you can give your detailed feedback during the private panel. Professor Ismail Albayrak is a professor in Islamic Studies from Australian Catholic University. Please.
Thank you, Hakan. Thank you very much. And thank you for this presentation, Momina. It is really good topic and important topic. And I really enjoy why I was reading your report. And I sent my general feedback to your supervisors. There are some of them are really very minor issues. There are a couple of major issues I would like to discuss now. The first thing is really your title, the main title of the thesis does not reflect the content of the report. You are really focusing on Australia, or with special reference to Australian context. So you have to put in your title, you are really dealing with these groups, two groups. You are comparing them and the status of the women in this group. But you are doing this in the context of Australia, not in general. The second issue, maybe you can really discuss with your supervisor in detail. When you say Nur movement, I understand Deobandi is a very important and quite compact movement. But when we say Nur movement, it is really open-ended, and there are
Which one?
very different groups in Australia. Some of them are quite very nice people, but insignificant as a number. Some of them are very active and institutional. They have many institutions. So which one you are really dealing with, and you have to specify and really. My own suggestion is really choose one of them. Is more active and more the one which have more institution than the others, and compare with these two rather than using generic term Nur movements are really very diverse group. So I hope do you get what, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes,
in terms of okay, this is really maybe you can discuss more with your supervisors, and this is I'm not really exaggerating. It's a very good topic, and as a female researcher, I'm very confident we will find many good things at the end and contribute to scholarship, in Islamic scholarship actually. Another issue is about the literature review, your literature. Your analysis of Deobandi section is really wonderful. But when it comes to Nur movement, you really mainly focus on Said Nursi's own writing. I think there are quite good number of literature now growing. How people understand Nursi's approach to status of the woman. So instead of really focusing a lot on Nursi's writing on the women issues, there are really variation and differences, and it's very interesting aspects. But generally speaking, when it comes to really legal issues, and it is quite conservative, and I don't think so it is very different from Deobandi scholars. So here the important thing is how people understand the Nursi's approach to women. So really you need to put a little bit detailed information, other literature, rather than just focusing on Nursi's writing. And if you just look at the Ibrahim Abu Rabi's edited books, you can find some of them there, and other topics. And there is, again, I don't want to take your time a lot, but regarding the methodology, and sorry, before passing by to methodology, when you analyze and evaluate this literature, sometimes you really connect them to your own research and raise some critical remark, bring some critical remark. But sometimes, transition is just quite descriptive. It is good to connect to your
Okay.
your own research. Which kind of gap you are going to fill when you, or what are the really advantages and disadvantages of this text, and you have to, with a couple of sentences, not really detailed explanation, but at least this is an MA thesis, and I see every kind of potential in this thesis, but still you have to make this connection in your literature review analysis. So one thing is about the methodology is really, I think my main suggestion or evaluation regarding to your methodological section is a little bit obscure. The textual analysis is very broad term, is an umbrella term. It is maybe focused on the language only, or rhetoric, or there are many subsections like content analysis or discourse analysis or many other things. I think you have to be a little bit specific, which kind of textual analysis you are going to do. That's what I understand from your own writing. It seems, discourse analysis is fit far more better than only with textual analysis. Really, I mean, dealing with different, it is very linguistic. So you have to make it more social and more specific rather than just using umbrella term. So there are very really few and minor issues, and you can discuss them with your supervisors. And at the moment, I'm really very happy to read this report, and I strongly encourage you to continue. And I am really hoping a very good product at the end. But please don't lose your scholarship and academic and critical approach. We are not here to approve or promote someone or something. If it is wrong. You have to be quite critical. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much for your feedback. I will incorporate that in the study.
Thank you, Professor Albayrak, for this constructive feedback. Momina, I am sure that you will really get benefit from this constructive feedback. Yes, after Professor Albayrak, Dr. Süleyman Sertkaya is my colleague in our Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization. Yes, please, your feedback will be valuable for Momina.
Thank you, Dr. Hakan, and congratulations first to Momina for this wonderful paper and presentation. Certainly, it's a great topic, and there's a great potential, obviously, in this area. But I cannot emphasize more than what Professor Ismail said, that this Nur, the term Nur, is really very confusing when you read it. To whom you are referring to. I think that really needs a clarification, and I agree with Professor Ismail's suggestion that it should be really narrowed down to a certain sub-Nur movement rather than a broad term it should be used, because and it does not give a clear indication, who are these people, because there are so many subcategories, and although they are inspired by Nursi, but their representation, their maybe to some extent word we may differ even, but you are quite clearly explaining how these two movements came into existence, and the literature, written literature about both movements, which is excellent. But it looks like the Australian context is really needs a development, and
Okay.
in that sense, I even think that instead of having this textual study or focus, you might even consider having some interviews to really have a true data about the representation of these two movements in Australia. Because whatsoever is written and your proposal, your literature review is it is very broad and it is not really limited to Australia, and how this is going to reflect the Australian perspective of these two movements. And when you read the proposal, there is kind of uncertainty whether you're going to talk about Australia or not really. So
Right.
you need to be very confident and clear that you're focusing on Australia, and your data should really reflect that quite clearly. And my personal suggestion would be some sort of interviews with both movements and their participants would really reflect the both movements representation in Australia, more so than what you refer to the textual studies in Nursi's works or even in Deobandi's one. I'm still not sure what is available there in Australia, about Australia. And if you're going to really focus in Australia, that should be clear, as Professor Ismail said, in the title, as well as you might to revise your chapter outline a little bit to put more emphasis on the Australian context and even to the methodology side. But overall, it is quite like you're capturing the general understanding of women in the existing literature, written literature. But that, the Australian part needs an emphasis, and on the side of, and I don't know much about the Deobandi movement. If they have also similar kind of pattern that, there are different groups under the Deobandi movement, and who are they in Australia, who is representing there, we may need also some sort of, focus there as well. So overall, it's an excellent topic. It has a very good potential. I think it can be a model really to understand how Muslims are, the perspective of women in Australia, like a general perspective can be deduced from this study as well. These two movements can be a case study. But my overall feedback is emphasis on the Australia and how we are going to source the data that really reflects their view in Australian context. Thank you, and all the best with your study.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
All right, thank you, Dr. Satkaya. We have around 7 minutes for the second presentation. I think we can get a few questions to Momina. If you have any question, let me check.
Hakan, can I
yes,
have a question?
Yes, please. Yes,
yeah.
Dr.
Well, I have a suggestion and a question that is linked to that.
Yes.
The firstly is that I suggest, the women in transnational movements are very important, and it's a neglected point. So this research is really important in my view, so I really support this. So in conjunction with that comment, I have a suggestion to look at the literature on, like academic literature on women in transnational movements, like not necessarily maybe Tabligh Jama or some other movements. I think there should be some. Why that is useful is that it might give some some ideas on methodologies used in these research and the theoretical frameworks that are used, so that maybe she can copy some of those, so that her research becomes comparable to the similar genre of research, women, in transnational movements. So I would recommend to situate, her research within that broader research area. And so in conjunction with that, my question is, along with what Suleiman mentioned, that like, Momina, have you considered doing interviews? Actually, even are you gonna do a PhD? If you're gonna do a PhD, have you considered interviewing first the women, actual women, what's their reality on the ground within these movements, and that could feed into your, I guess, it can become the information that you need to then go back to the sources of these movements, like Said Nursi's writings and Deobandi's websites, that how reality, like how do they compare to the reality of teachings and the ideals that they present. Like you could start from that and go towards that. I mean, you could do it either way, but sometimes when you go straight into the theoretical writings, it can really cloud the reality of the women. So I really think that that reality should be established first in this, masters by research, and then you can make it bigger in as a PhD. I don't know, have you considered that, Michael?
Firstly, thank you so much for your feedback. I will incorporate that. And secondly, yes, we did have that discussion, and it was suggested because the master's is a bit short, that if we included interviews, I would have an ethical form, and that would take a long time, 6 months above. So it was suggested that perhaps for the master's, we would stick to the data that's existent about the organizations, which is very limited. And then if we proceed to the PhD, to then move on to the interviews with the women and make it more practical.
Okay. Well, ethics application doesn't take too long. That's a worst case scenario. It usually takes 2-3 months if you do a good application.
Right.
I guess, I'm not sure if that was the reason, but thank you for your answer.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Mehmet, for this feedback as well. I think I agree. As far as I remember, there are some research on Tabligh Jamaat, in English in the West. Maybe, Momina, you can benefit from those research. Maybe they can help you as well. Let me have a look. Meshid, while she's on maternity leave, very interesting and important topic of research. She has also some recommendations here. Textual-based communities versus non-textual, to further analyze your two focus groups, and importance of your choice of study women. Why women? Why we are focusing on women? I think this looks also important in their social, political context. And she also put emphasis on interviews. Dr. Mehmet has already indicated. And Eliza, thanks, very interesting, informative. Do you have any question? We have just 3 minutes. To the second presentation. If you have any comments or question, please, you can pose to Momina.
I just only remind Momina. I don't remember whether I wrote in her report or not, but it is good to look at some feminist theories regarding the women issues. And I'm not suggesting you can take everything, but the issue is already discussed in different circles, even in Christian and Jewish circles. So it is good to benefit from their own methodological approaches to this kind of issues, without spoiling the spirit of your work. It is good to look at some feminist studies also. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
All right. Is there any question? I think we can finish the first part now. Ensar Kutahija. Now, second presentation will be delivered by Ensar Kutahija. Just little bit information about him. Ensar Kutahija is an imam in the Bosniak Islamic Center of Queensland. He became Hafizul Qur'an when he was 17-year-old. After graduating Islamic studies in Sarajevo, Bosnia, he completed his Master of Classical Arabic at Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization. His main fields of interest are the Quran, Tafsir, and Classical Arabic. Currently, he is a master's by research student at Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization. And his topic is related to tafsir, Quran and interpretation, titled Mystical Interpretation of Prophet Isa in Bursawi's Quran commentary. Yes, please. Yes, you have already shared. Yeah, please go ahead. You can start now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please, you can start, please.
Assalamu alaikum to everyone. This is my proposal presentation for Masters by Research named Mystical Approach to the Story of Isa or Jesus in Ruhul Bayan, which is commentary by Sufi exeget Ismail Haki Bursawi. As all presentations, I had to address certain parts, necessary parts of presentation, sections which will be addressed separately during my presentation. In introduction, I would like to give you an insight into basic ideas and motives, my intentions, why I picked tafsir as a field and the Sufi tafsir as a literature genre as a part of a wide exegetical heritage, and why Isa in Ruhul Bayan made by Bursawi. First of all, there is nothing in Islam more important than Qur'an. Quran is a living word delivered by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to all humankind. It is an immediate connection and between God and in humankind. Prophet was the first exeget. He was the first mufassir. He was teaching his companions, and he shared tafsir as a knowledge with his companions. They left it to the followers, they left it to the generations behind them, and so forth up to nowadays. So basically, tafsir is a living historical witness of development of Islamic sciences. It is the most comprehensive and reliable source of knowledge and tradition. But surprisingly, tafsir hasn't received enough attention, hasn't been scrutinized as we would all expect it. Why it is very important for Muslims to understand Quran in order to implement it correctly. But nowadays, the challenges of modern times are that it is very important that non-Muslims understand the way Muslims understand the Quran. Why Isa alayhi salam? Why Jesus? Everything about Isa is exceptional and unusual and miraculous. His conception, his birth, his life, his departure from this world, his comeback, his return in eschatology. Ishari or allusive tafsir is a part of vast hermeneutical heritage, gives us deeper and hidden meanings, at the same time not neglecting exoteric obvious meanings. Ismail Haki Bursawi, I picked him and his Ruhul Bayan for a number of reasons, but I just named few. He was an exceptional scholar. He was Mufassir himself. He was Sheikh of his Sufi order. He was a Sheikh in Madrasa, and he was even musician. Literature review, as essential part of this proposal, will cover Ottoman tafsir, will cover Bursawi and Ruhul Bayan, and will cover Isa as viewed by Sufi classic literature, modern literature, and Western academic circles. There is a discussion between scholars. Should we view Sufi or Ishari tafsir as a separate literature genre or as a part of exegetical milieu? We should take into consideration few points. No Sufi tafsirs, they don't have unique or shared structure. So when you take Sufi tafsir in front of you, you cannot say this is Sufi tafsir because it's been mentioned there. Neither do Sufi tafsir have a shared structure among themselves. Ishari not necessarily relates to interpretation of the Quran. So when we take Rumi's Masnavi or Fususul Hikam or Futuhat Makkiyah, they are basically exegetical words by Ibn Arabi, but they are not considered tafsirs. Often Sufi authors did not identify themselves as Sufis because at the beginning, in the early era of Islamic tradition, this was derogatory term. Zuhad or pious people were in use. So we didn't really know who was Sufi, who was not, because Sufis, didn't identify themselves as Sufis. Terminology that was used was not exclusively esoteric. So haram, halal, awliya, and so forth, they are all terms used by both traditionalists and Sufi exegetes. What makes Sufi tafsir mystical? Probably the best answer was given by Al-Tustari, the early exegete of Sufi tradition, who was for Sufi tafsir was Tabari for traditional, who said the one who would like to interpret Quran properly, he needs to combine remembering Allah with knowledge and practice, which give him opportunity to create interpretive essence. I would like to share with you a few interesting points related to Ishari Sufi tafsir. Sufis claimed that they had sense and for understanding and meaning of the Quran, which other people not. So at the same time, not ignoring exoteric meaning, they would offer esoteric, deeper, hidden meanings, often hidden among the sentences and words of the Quran. Spiritual experience was always sparked by ishara or allusion. A difference between tafsir and ta'wil is something that needs to be brought to attention, because at the first 3 centuries of Islam, term ta'wil was in use, and even was used by the Prophet, peace be upon him, who made the famous dua for Ibn Abbas, asking Allah to teach him ta'wil of the Quran. Ta'wil means to understand something, to interpret something, bringing it back, returning to its original meaning. Allusion or ishara is not something obligatory. It's not for everyone. Not anyone can experience it. Ma'rifa or knowledge or wisdom, which comes after ishara as a final result, is something instructional but not explanatory. There are 2 types of Sufi tafsir: Nazari, which is speculative, or which is started by Ibn Arabi as a theoretical Sufism, and Ishari allusive tafsir. Traditionalists like Ibn Taymiyyah and Al-Wahidi, they opposed Sufi tafsir. Their main objection was that Sufi tafsir, Ishari's tafsir, they ignored the obvious meaning following unusual and unaccepted methods of understanding and interpreting Quran. While at the same time, Al-Ghazali and Suyuti, most prominent ones, they defended it by saying, you know, if we limit understanding of Quran by what companions and first generation said, that would be unfair restriction of Quranic potential. Suyuti was of similar opinion. We are still in literature review. Suleiman Atesh offered 5 periods of development of Sufi or Ishari tafsir. The very first period is an early or formative period where first written works on tafsir emerged, where the exegetes, they were commenting some of the verses but not the Quran. The very first tafsir is tafsir of Tustari, who was foreman of Sufi tafsir, and they many compare him to At-Tabari for traditional tafsir. Classic period is a period of systemization of previous works where As-Sulami took the main role. Period of development and establishment of Sufi thought, where Al-Qushayri and Al-Maybudi took the front roles. Period of exegetical activity influenced by Ibn Arabi is the 4th period. Ottoman period, where we have first Hashia or gloss commenting of tafsir works with Abu Su'ud al-Imadi and Ismail Haqi Bursawi as the most prominent Ottoman exegetes. Also, we have to mention that this period of Sufi tradition, of exegetical tradition, is most neglected one. The most prominent Sufi exegetes, I made a list here. We won't go all through them, but I have to mention Tustari and Sulami, then El-Ghazali and his Ihya Ulumuddin, which many people actually don't know. This is not tafsir. This is just a work on piety, on code of conduct and beliefs. But it is considered an exegetical work, but it's not tafsir itself. After Ibn Arabi and Al-Kubra, we got Najmuddin al-Razi al-Daya, and then we have Sadruddin al-Kunawi, who was very influenced by Ibn Arabi and was actually his stepson. Then An-Nisaburi al-Kashani, who was the first one to comment, to make commentary of Ibn Arabi's work, although he didn't agree with Arabi in all aspects of his works. Then we have Dawood al-Qaisari, who was the first sheikh, first teacher in first madrasa established in Iznik in 1331, and his Muqaddimah, which is considered a prerequisite for all Sufi studies. And of course, Ismail Haqi Bursawi, the case study figure of this proposal. What is the connection of all these Sufi tafsirs and great works with Ruhul Bayan? This is very important to bring to attention. They got exhaustive introduction. They explain motives, principles, methodology, and purpose. Terms kashf, ilham, inspiration, and marifa, knowledge or wisdom, are defined as the final goals of ishara. Sometimes these words are used separately with slightly different meaning, but very often as synonyms. Exoteric aspect of Sufi tafsir is never neglected. So Sufi, they say, Quran has obvious meaning, but there is something more, which is esoteric, meaning hidden, meaning which is looked for, but it is never imposed. Use of nasiha or admonishing advice. Sufi tafsir are full of storytelling and poetry, which serve the purpose of giving advice. Very often, Persian language is being used as in its explanatory role. And all these works after, of course, Ibn Arabi's time are heavily influenced by his intellectual legacy. When it comes to Ottoman times and tafsir heritage in it, I would like to bring to attention a few things. The Ottomans generally contributed a lot to the Quranic sciences. Role of Sufism or Tasawwuf is unique. Tasawwuf was taught on two levels. In madrasa, had a role of institution, what would be today university, and its role was production of professional teachers who would teach Quran, Hadith, Sufism, and everything. And Sufism had its informal social setup, and these two never clashed. Actually, they coexisted and complemented each other perfectly. Madrasa curriculum mainly was based on two great tafsirs, which is Kashaf by al-Zamakhshari and Anwar al-Tanzil by al-Baydawi, but these two were not the only tafsirs used in madrasa curriculum. This period, as we previously mentioned, has been largely unexplored and unstudied, especially in English language. Few attempts been made recently by Saqib Yildiz in 1987, Mohammed Abba in 92, Zia Demir 94, Mustafa Öztürk 2012, and Istanbul Research and Education Foundation, who organized symposium named Osmanlı'da İlm Tefsir in 2018. When it comes to research on Bursawi and Ruhul Bayan, the full name of tafsir is Ruhul Bayan fi Tafsir al-Quran, which would interpret spirit of expression in the exegesis of the Quran. This is Bursawi's magnus opus, or his life work. He was writing it over 20 years. It is mainly in Arabic and some part of it in Persian. He based it on his ceremonies that he was holding in Istanbul in mosque, and it was suggested by his Sheikh Osman Fazli to do this work. It is compendium in style, which means it collects all tafsir traditions in one, minding both exoteric and esoteric meaning and interpretation at the same time. It was first published in 1866, and in 1998, Muhammad Sabuni made an addition when he indicated that some of the narrations that Bursawi brought to his tafsir are not authentic, and he taken them out, which he was criticized for. People, a scholar circle especially, said it would have been much better, more effective if he left these narrations in there for scholars to be able to compare. Bursawi wrote over 120 works. This cannot be authenticated and scientifically proven, but many reports indicate so. In Ruhul Bayan, we can find two features of the Ottoman tafsirs in general. First one is tawfiq or syncretism. Ruhul Bayan pays attention to various traditions in one tafsir, and tatbiq, which is correspondence, that both exoteric and esoteric meanings are there. When it comes to Western academia and Bursawi and Ruhul Bayan, we do not have much, but we got some attempts by Cemal Elias, Gunay Alpay Kurt, International Symposium on Bursawi held in Bursa, Turkey, 2013. We got a beautiful PhD dissertation by Camelia Tanasova, in which she addressed a communication of Bursawi, who considered himself and people around him as the axis of the Qutb. He was the leading Islamic religious figure of his time. And we got Alexander Knish with Sufism 2017, and Peter Coppins. His research on Bursawi is very significant for a number of reasons, but I would like to highlight one. He noticed that even the Bursawi, who was heavily influenced by Ibn Arabi, didn't always agree with him when it comes to interpretation of certain verses. So he suggested a study into these sporadic disagreements. Now we come to the case study, which is Isa in classical Sufi literature. Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus, was always viewed as a human purity and a true Sufi. Many Sufis who followed Hassan al-Basri and Jafar al-Sadiq actually saw Isa alayhi salam as the very first Sufi on earth. The main topic in Sufism or Tasawwuf is love, and Isa and his life and everything about him is full of love. He is embodiment of human perfection, and love and God's nearness is eternal goal of Tasawwuf. This is why Ibn Arabi saw Isa alayhi salam as Insan Kamil, a perfect human being, which is embodiment of God's attributes and name in human being. Very similar presentation of Isa or Jesus we have in Rumi's Mesnevi, when we sometimes really have to pay attention who is Muslim Isa and who is Christian Jesus, because they perfectly coexist and complement each other. And also interesting reports are saying that Ibn Arabi, who devoted much of space in Fusus al-Hikam and Futuhat Makkiyah, spent the last days of his worldly life in Damascus, expecting Isa to come down while he's still alive. In modern literature, we got Tarif Khalidi with Muslim Jesus, Mona Siddiqui, Zeki Saritoprak, Matthias Zan Nisser, and Mustafa Akyol. Tarif Khalidi made a wonderful book, The Muslim Jesus, where he collected all the narrations about Isa by people who highly respect him, but they don't consider him divine. Zeki Saritoprak, for example, made Islam's Jesus with one thing in view, in mind, to explain to non-Muslims how Isa is being viewed in Islamic tradition. And Islamic Jesus, How the King of Jews Became a Prophet of the Muslims, is a wonderful book which explains how some Jewish traditions became Christians and how these Jewish or Christian traditions and practices ended up being Islamic. So very interesting, in last 7 years, we got 4 magnificent books on Isa and how he's being viewed in Islamic tradition, which would I cordially invite to you to read if you have some time. Now, that was literature review. Gap in knowledge and research questions. Obviously, Ottoman's exegesis generally is unexplored. Ruhul Bayan, his compendium style, the importance of its historical context is huge. It is tafsir that is both at the same time exoteric and esoteric. It is traditional and Sufi at the same time. But the time of its emergent appearance is very interesting. Somehow, the Ismail Haqi Bursawi was in the middle of time of Ottoman Empire, so he had time to collect tafsir heritage from before and influence tafsir heritage after him. And finally, we have Ibn Arabi, by whom Ismail Haqi Bursawi was very influenced. It is very interesting to see how he saw Isa, how he saw the role of Isa in Tasawwuf, and how he saw Isa as a realization of love, perfection, and Insan Kamil. So research questions that would be, what was Bursawi's spiritual theological interpretation on Isa? How Sufi interpretation of prophethood saw the prophethood in Islam? What are the Bursawi's contribution to Sufi tafsir in general, as we can see it in case of Isa presented in his Ruhul Bayan? Theoretical framework. In this work, we got 3 Islamic concepts. First one is prophethood in Islamic theology. We simply cannot imagine a religion without prophethood. Prophethood is a necessity for human beings. It is their way of understanding God's message. Prophethood is the bridge between divine and human. Now, how this bridge is being seen through the relationship of the prophets with Allah. Prophets, they got their mission with human beings, but also they had their personal relationship with God. But this personal relationship with this, which is special from all aspects, has been shared with their followers. So the prophetic personal experience in relation to Allah is also shared with the followers of that prophet. So it is very interesting to see how Sufism sees this, bearing in mind layers of meaning, hidden and deeper meanings, maratibul ma'ani, which Sufi tafsir insists on, can offer us some amazing interpretations. Methodology used in this work. 3 main research objectives: to investigate aspects of Ishari interpretation of the Qur'an as presented in the Ruhul Bayan, to examine trace of Sufi exegesis and role of Ruhul Bayan in historical and intellectual context within Ottoman intellectual tradition, and to analyze Bursawi's views on prophethood, the prophet's relations with God, Isa, mission, and his eschatological role. Data collection. Primary sources are obviously Ruhul Bayan, which is 10-volume tafsir written in Arabic and Persian. I be using Darul Fikr edition 2008, and of course Qur'an in Arabic and as translated by Yusuf Al-Ali. Also, I'll be using some Sufi exegetical sources written by Al-Maybudi, Ibn Arabi, Al-Kashani, Kubra, and others, and secondary sources on Sufi tafsir, Sufism, Bursawi, Isa, and prophethood in general, written in Arabic, English, Turkish, and Bosnian language. Data analysis. The mixed methods will be used. Content analysis as a scoping activity is simply finding the verses of Quran where Isa has been mentioned. There are 93 verses over 14 chapters. Textual analysis. discussions and commentaries made by Bursawi on prophethood and Isa in particular, comparative analysis to see how Bursawi used Akbarian and Kubrawi context and what are his original contributions. Critical appraisal will give us insight into Bursawi's work or link between Islamic theology, Sufism, and tafsir of the Qur'an as Sufi saw it. And finally, thematic analysis, which will help identify, analyze, and present the case of Isa through the light of Shishari Tafsir in Bursawi Ruhul Bayan, where special attention will be paid to Isa as the word of God and spirit from him, and his mi'ad or return or his nuzul as understood by Bursawi, who was influenced by Ibn Arabi. The chapter's outline. Apart from introduction and literature review, which we already went through, we will have Ottoman Sufi Tafsir tradition and Ismail Haqi Bursawi. This chapter will review and examine the treasure of the Ottoman Tafsir heritage, its main traits and influence in the science of Tafsir in the Ottoman Empire and in general. Chapter 3 will present the importance of Isa's mission and prophethood based on the Quran and Hadith. This chapter also will reveal the perspectives of Bursawi's understanding of prophethood in Islamic theology. And chapter number 4 will be devoted to the sensitive and fine relationship between God and his prophets, with a focus on love as a primordial feeling and grounding for this relationship. Of course, again, Isa will be in focus as embodiment of this love and human perfection. And finally, conclusion will provide some final thoughts and findings on Ishari Tafsir and levels of meaning presented by Bursawi in his commentary, having focus on verses about Prophet Isa or Jesus. This is my timeline. So far, it's going well. We started by the end of last year. Everything is going according to plan. Inshallah, I plan to finish this about the same time next year. I would like to use this opportunity to thank Almighty God for giving me opportunity and ability to do this. I would like to thank my supervisors, Dr. Mehmet, Dr. Hakan, for giving me guidelines, being patient with me, appropriate feedback, and supporting me. And I would like to thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ensar Kutahija, for this great presentation. I think you covered and you summarized this research proposal, this research topic very well. All right, now after this presentation, we have two reviews. First, now Associate Professor Züleyha Keskin will provide her feedback. Please provide your general feedback, Züleyha, then after the colloquium, we will have a private panel and you can give your detailed feedback, please.
Okay, you can hear me well?
Yes, yes.
All right, great. Okay, you know, it's a very good topic, Ensar, and I think having the looking at, you know, Isa alayhi salam and the mystical exegete Bursawi's work is very good, and you know, particularly reading through your literature review, I can see that you've done extensive research of the literature and that you're familiar with the literature. And it's very clear that you've got a good historical understanding of tafsir as well and how it developed and evolved, and particularly the where the Sufi tafsir sits amongst that genre in general was good to see. So, you know, it's a very good foundation, certainly. So I think it's a significant contribution with regards to research. Just a few things, I guess, just general feedback I wanted to provide is, just reading my notes. Okay, I guess when you do write the literature, an important part of doing that is highlighting the gap. And it doesn't mean that you need to always have the, you know, mention the gap, but you write the literature review with that particular gap in mind. And it somehow sometimes subtly would come through. So I think that, you know, to me that could be put, come to the forefront a bit more, like as in when you're writing the literature review.
More stressed, yeah.
Yeah, a bit more stressed, and you know, what's the actual gap that you're trying to fulfill. Sometimes, you know, you do provide literature obviously on the background and, you know, so forth. There it's not so necessary, but then gets to a point where you think, okay, what aspect of the literature gap are you hoping to fulfill? And I guess by doing the literature review, you show that there is that gap. And I think that will particularly become more evident, you know, well, I guess with the research questions, you had 3 research questions, but I was wondering what your overarching research question is. And therefore I was thinking, are we going in the direction of prophethood, Sufism, exegesis, interfaith dialogue?
Going everywhere.
No, they're all interconnected, so I can definitely see how they're interconnected, but Ensar Kamil stood out to me. Like that seemed like it was a key part of your discussion, and because all those things are connected, but you just need to bring them together a bit more and say, you know, maybe this is just a suggestion, you would talk to your supervisors about this, but you know, in a way, like how does Bursawi identify how an Ensar Kamil appears or is established through his tafsir, something like that. So to me then it's like, oh yeah, everything becomes about, your whole research is about identifying his identification of Ensar Kamil through Isa alayhi salam, say. So if you can just word it or bring it together a bit more like that, I think that would really help.
More specifically, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's you know, it takes a bit of time to work these things out. I understand that, and you know, at the moment I can see a lot of your energy has gone into the literature, which is really an important part of your research. So you know, hats off to you for putting in that effort. But now I guess it's like you just got to you know, bring it together a bit more.
Sure.
And that shouldn't be too much work at all.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
And that will then, in a way, you will then be able to polish off your literature review a bit more. Because if it's about Ensar Kamil, then it would be like, well, who has written what about Ensar Kamil? If that's the key point of your research. So you might need to add some slight sections like that, possibly.
Yeah.
The other so we mentioned the questions. I like how you're focusing, you've identified 14. I like that you're focusing on Isa alayhi salam only, because sometimes we do get ambitious with these kind of researchers and say, I want to do all the prophets or something, but it's good that you've identified Isa alayhi salam, and it probably suits the type of tafsir you're going to focus on very well. So, you know, that I think was a good thing, and it gives you a good solid work to deal with. And yeah, as I mentioned with the you know, there was in your proposal particularly, there was talk about interfaith dialogue, and I understand that this work will help with interfaith dialogue, but if you're not really going to discuss too much about interfaith dialogue, then you know, it's probably not worth mentioning too much, because the minute I start reading about interfaith dialogue, then it's becomes, well, is that the focus of this? If it is, then there's an expectation that you would develop that further. So I would say that once you've solidified your, you know, the theoretical framework and identified exactly what you want to achieve, as I said, if it's Ensar Kamil, then you could probably go and do some more tweaking to your literature review. Oh. But otherwise it's good. So with the methodology, as I said, having those 14 verses and analyzing them and looking, and I think you've got a big advantage that you've got, you know, Arabic background, so you can go into those Arabic sources, extensive Arabic sources. So that's a big plus for you.
Yeah. Thank Allah.
Yeah, and your timeline, I think it looks realistic. So that's about it. I wish you all the best with your research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zuleyha. I appreciate it. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Bir şey değil.
All right, Züleyha, thank you so much for your constructive feedback. Really, we will take this into consideration. We thought, as you said, as Ensar Hoca said, this is very broad topic. In this master, this is now currently master by research, but we are thinking of upgrading it to PhD. We thought that's just prophethood. We should focus on just prophethood aspect. But of course, it is open to other topics, but we will definitely consider your feedback. And after Züleyha, you know, we as supervisors, Dr. Mehmet and me, we requested a report from Peter Coppens. Ensar Kutahija actually cited, mentioned his work as well. He is also important academic in Sufi studies, Qur'an and Sufi studies. Peter Coppens, assistant professor in the Faculty of Religion Theology, University of Amsterdam. He accepted and he sent his detailed review report, but because of time difference, unfortunately, he couldn't join. Let me read some of his.
I'm very delighted. Very delighted. Oh,
yeah, he was excited as well. He also liked this proposal and he fully supports. And you cited, I know, from in your research proposal. Let me read some of his comments on behalf of him. He couldn't join due to time difference. He is in the Netherlands. Let me, yeah. I will read some of his comments, but of course, for the detailed, I will send it to Ensar and also supervisors.
I'm gladly surprised.
Yeah, he supports this proposal, this research. He says Tafsir of Bursawi has not received the attention it deserves in Western academia yet. It is thus important and timely, and I highly recommend to support this research. For this reason, the candidate has clearly read most relevant literature and knows how to synthesize these in combination with his own creative questions. And he also suggests as a recommendation, he has some minor recommendations he fully supports, but he has some minor recommendations to further to develop this topic research further. He says that it is fruitful to more actively involve Turkish literature, not only Süleyman Ateş, but also I think he knows Mahmud Ay, for example. Yeah. Turkish academy is gaining in quality and importance, and since it is unfortunately not likely in the short term that Western academics are going to learn Turkish, it is a responsibility for Turkish-speaking academics to disclose the very good Turkish discourse to a wider Western academic audience. This will make the research very strong, he says.
I have to master Turkish language.
You have advantage as well. You have also Turkish side. This is good. And like Züleyha, as minor suggestion, he says that his discussion of literature should be more in service of his main research questions. This is especially important when he actually starts writing his thesis. He says his discussion of literature should be more in service of his main research questions. The candidate sufficiently shows that Ottoman tafsir, more specifically Bursawi, is an important gap to be filled in our knowledge of the tafsir tradition, and that Jesus needs scrutiny from this perspective.
Good.
There is no any ground ethical risks. And I wish the candidate the best of luck and hope an English-speaking audience will soon learn more about this important work of tafsir. He says he has some minor recommendations. I will give you.
We didn't upset. We didn't upset.
All right. All right. Thank you, Züleyha and Peter, for your feedback. And now, we have around 10 minutes. If you have any question to Ensar Kutahija, please, you can ask your questions. We have around 10 minutes after. Yes.
No questions. No questions.
Yes, I have one. Thank you, Ensar, for your presentation. That topic, I was thinking to write down a paper about it, but now you took it over.
Sorry, I was faster.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
My question is because in the tafsir, as you mentioned, there are some Persian passages.
Yes.
which is very important in regard to your topic. You know, how are you going to, I don't know your Persian. I hope that you have at least.
Yeah,
some
I mean, you know, I'm a bit of short of Turkish. If I spend for 6 or 12 months, I would be confident in my Turkish. My Persian is zero, you know. So
Zero.
yes, that would be, you know, that's something I was thinking of, and even starting, you know, learning Persian, because, you know, I started digging, you know, so I have to know, you know, and yeah, probably to consult some Persian, you know, interpreters, translators,
Yeah.
you know, and or you know, because obviously the tafsir hasn't been translated even from Arabic, let alone, you know, some passages, yes,
Yeah.
but
My-
that will be a challenge. Yes, that will be a challenge.
My question is, because in the tafsir, there are also a lot what we call unauthentic sources or information, and including Israeliyat, non-Muslim,
Yes.
from non-Muslim sources.
Yes.
How are you going to examine? Do you have any criteria to examine or to analyze these Israeliyat or unauthentic information?
But generally, as you know, Israeliyat, you know, they are either acceptable, or, you know, we are reserved about them, or they are not acceptable, you know. Or if I will come across them, you know, I will try to find them in any other sources, you know, if they're being valorized, you know, in some other sources, you know. If not, then I'll try to explore, you know, all my avenues and see, you know, how reliable they. If there is a proof they are not authentic, they are not reliable, well, I'll treat them as such.
Thank you.
No worries.
Just in conjunction with Professor Salih's question, maybe I missed you in your presentation, but I am also a little bit familiar to Bursawi's tafsir, and it's all, you know, he's really coming from Ekberian tradition.
Yes.
And he's a Jalveti, as far as I remember.
Jalveti Sheikh, yes.
And he's a very strong connection with Hudais and all other things. But at the same time, he used many sources like people, you know, the Sadi Shirazi, Hafiz,
yes.
And his many quotation actually reflects this side, and sometimes he goes against Ekberian understanding also.
Yes.
Try to find some kind of middle way. Really, he's not a person who is intoxicated with this mystical completely. Right. So it is really good to know his other sources, and in terms of these sources, this Persian side is important. But my question is really, when I listen to you are very tasawwuf friendly person, and I haven't seen any critical remarks.
Is this good or bad?
It's good. You know, I personally,
Thank you.
I love the mystical tradition of Islam, and it's very powerful and very rich. But here you are doing MA, and most probably, inshallah, you will transfer to PhD. I mean, what kind of really critical evaluation, or what kind of, I haven't seen any, and even in this, you are at the beginning of your research, but really you need some kind of critical mindset also, not only
some filter.
It is true in especially in non-Turkish academia. Ismail Hakkı Bursevi is neglected, and this research will be very valuable research in English. Really, I mean, Hakan knows. Recently there is a big tafsir project in Germany, and they couldn't find a person to write about Ismail Hakkı Bursevi, and nearly 1 year after 1 year, the Turkish guy come up, and he assumed this job. But this is important, but you need really some kind of to find a way to critical remarks, and his sources is very rich, very rich. I mean, Ismail Hakkı Bursawi this is actually the scholars in his time, after Abu Suud and many people, the mystical commentary a little bit weakened, but they revive again in 18th century, at the beginning, the beginning of 18th century. This is really worth working on it. The second issue, actually, you are going to focus on prophethood and special reference to Isa alayhi salam in his work. And Bursawi is really amazing man. If you read his analysis of the Musa Khidr narrative, or this heavenly table narrative, he connects. But it does not mean that he is not using really proper sources or other sources. And some people are very critical about his tafsir. They don't consider his tafsir as a tafsir, but he used major sources a lot in his tafsir also. So, how can you have some kind of balance between his really extreme sources? He used some sources quite difficult to digest, and he used very common source and bring. And I think the most important thing when you deal with exegesis, Quranic exegesis is important field and important genre, but it is not unique. And the Islamic sciences are actually theology and jurisprudence, and exegesis is a little bit light science, and you can say something in exegesis, but you cannot say same thing in jurisprudence or theology. So Ismail Hakkı Bursawi used this flexibility to bring all these materials to his tafsir, but you have to have a really strong balance in these diverse sources. Thank you.
I think my Sufi intuition will help me.
Inshallah.
Can I echo that, Ensar? I think that, as Professor Ismail said, there will be critics of Bursawi, and it would be good to have a section. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but it just acknowledges that you've noted them, that you know they exist, and you can document it, and then you could respond to them even. But it would be good to at least mention a few of his critics who don't agree with his style or something.
This is something I definitely was going to do. I've read some in literature in Arabic, and in there's some they heavily criticize him, disapprove, and so forth. So it is worth mentioning at least few of them, or their basic main ideas. What they actually object in his work. So inshallah, that's the plan.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Albayrak, I think for these important points. Peter also, I think, noticed, in your writing, he says, it is recommendable to write, sometimes the personal convictions of the candidate seem to become over-evident, sometimes essentializing what Islam or Sufism is, and it is not wrong, he says, but he has some recommendations as well. He noticed same as well. I will share it with you. His details.
I'm looking forward to reading this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Any other comment or question to Ensar Kutahija about this topic? Ismail Hakkı Bursawi, his tafsir on Isa, Jesus.
I talk a lot, but I am a little bit curious. Do you come across any anecdote in Bursawi's? There is a famous Muslim muhaddis, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, in his the Tabakat, al-Isabe fi Temiz Sahabe, he considered Isa alayhi salam the last companion actually. and he gives
That's right.
3 pages
That's right.
to
That's right.
and because of his, Nuzuli Isa, and does Bursawi discuss this kind of things? Have you come
Nuzuli
across?
Isa.
There is discussion in
Okay,
I can't
okay.
remember very exactly in comment
Okay.
of which verse, but I came across, because I obviously marked all the verses, where Isa is mentioned directly or indirectly. So yeah, I came across that, yeah. And obviously there is a space next to the Prophet ﷺ in grave, that
Yes.
waiting for
Thank
Isa
you.
alayhi salam. So
Thank you for this information.
Thanks for reminding. Yep.
Ensar Kutahija will focus on the topic, story of Isa thematically, not chronologically, not chapter by chapter. His birth, his mission, his prophethood, and his duty maybe after his death, Nuzuli Isa, his ascension to heavens, topic by topic he will analyze based on the Quranic verses and also Bursawi in the context of prophethood notion in Islamic theology and tafsir literature.
And we have to leave something to a PhD. We can't get done everything right now.
Yes, you're right. Yes, we will add maybe, after masters, we will add to some topics for PhD. Yeah, hopefully after the successful completion of this master's thesis. All right. Any other comment or question? If there is no any other comment and question, I would like to finish today's research colloquium here. Thank you for all of you for joining today to this last research colloquium organized by Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization. Inshallah, we will continue next year, and I will schedule research colloquiums, and of course we will make advertisements. This is the end of the colloquium. Please, supervisors and reviewers, if you stay back, I will continue with you for the private, for our private review panel. But for others, this is the end of the colloquium. Please, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I would like to see you in our next research colloquium in February. Thank you so much. Supervisors and reviewers, please stay back. Ensar Kutahija and Momina, you don't need to join this private panel. We will let you know. We will inform you.
No worries.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll see you.
Thank you. And Dr. Mehmet, you can stay back as well.
No worries. I think
just one.
Hakan, you can disconnect people as a host.
I see. All right. Yeah, just a second.
Go to participants.
All right. Let me. One more. I think yes, that is done.
Good.
All right. Now I think we should start with first with Momina and Ismail Hocam and Süleyman Hocam. Your overall recommendation is accepted, subject to minor amendments, or we did not. I don't. Maybe you have already submitted reports.
But it would be good to hear. It would be good to hear again from Süleyman Hoca and Ismail Hoca, like as to what the recommendation are, whether it's minor revision or major revision, and why.
Actually, I sent. It's a good topic, really good topic, and I strongly recommend her to continue. But I found it quite weak. I say